And so we ended up turning off this test and rerunning it, and we weren't able to replicate it. It was actually really flat. Going back to like just the historical time, because this is not the first time we had tested it, right? We've tested it about 6 or 8 times now, and we've always seen them be really flat, and that's, I think, what happened here. The test was completely inconclusive in the second run. I think our hypothesis there, or it was surprising to us.
Welcome to the Experimentation Edge, where product managers, data scientists, and engineers talk about how they make smarter decisions. I'm Ashley Stirrup, the Chief Marketing Officer for GrowthBook. And in each episode, I'll sit down with an executive to unpack how they use experimentation and A/B testing to make better decisions. This show is sponsored by GrowthBook, the open source experimentation platform leader. Now let's jump in and get started with our next guest. Welcome to today's episode. I'm excited to welcome Medha Umarji, VP of Growth and Experimentation at Fanatics. And Medha, maybe you could start things off with just telling us a little bit about Fanatics and the scale of the business there.
Sounds great. Ashley, I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me. I've been at Fanatics for about 10 years now. Fanatics, you might have heard about us. You might have seen, billboards and posters about us at all these different sporting events. We are basically a sports merchandising retailer, and we're like a pure play e-commerce company, but we're starting to get more into in-venue retail and things like that. I work for Fanatics Commerce, which is one branch of the entire Fanatics umbrella. We also have, Fanatics Betting and Gaming, some other kind of Fanatics Collectibles, Fanatics Live, our other sister companies at Fanatics. At Fanatics Commerce, our scale is pretty straight. I want to say we are growing. We have about 60 million visits a month. We have about 900 sites, all the major sports leagues and like WWE, NFL, NBA, NHL, all the soccer stuff is with us. So we are, I want to say, the most dominant player in the sports licensing and merchandising world. So it is an exciting time to be here.
And I didn't realize it's a multi-billion-dollar business. That's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
And so I decided to have some fun with today's episode and got myself a hat off of the site. I'm a big Warriors fan. Sadly, they're not in the playoffs anymore, but I can still root for them. And so it's a good excuse to buy some of your merch.
I'd be interested to know your experience of shopping with us.
It was very smooth. I thought about the whole checkout process as I went through it. And yeah, it was super smooth. So it was great. So maybe to kick things off, could you tell us a little bit about the experimentation program at Fanatics?
Yeah, experimentation at Fanatics has evolved from like a boutique CRO team, testing like just little conversion nudges and things like that, into like a full-fledged, mature, program that now tackles like all stages of the entire like e-commerce life cycle, from merchandising to pricing to fulfillment, delivery, customer satisfaction, just a whole plethora of, aspects around the entire e-commerce business, really. We started out by doing about, I want to say 10 experiments a month. And we are close to 100 a month at this point over the last 10 years. So it's definitely been, a growth journey.
Yeah, that's terrific. And what led to making experimentation, that important? And, why did you invest to grow it at, basically 10x?
I think that, as I mentioned before, since we're a pure play e-commerce company, all the signals that we can get from from our customers are really via testing and learning. And, there was almost no option for us but to kind of really lean into experimentation to learn about our customers, in addition to the user research and things like that. And the other interesting thing at Fanatics has always been that our leadership has been so invested in our in the data and just the trajectory of findings about customers that I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, like basically just to give you an example, I mean, we try to test each and everything that is hitting our site, right? And it's not just whether we're launching a new payment method or we're launching a new feature in checkout, but it also is things like, the tariffs are coming. We need to test our prices. What impact is this going to have on the business? And the good news is like everyone from our CEO down, like is very invested in data. We all have our opinions and, everybody feels very strongly about them. However, our culture is such that, I mean, data sort of takes the precedence. I mean, nobody's arguing as long as we're convinced and we think that the data makes sense. Like all the decisions are very much data driven at Fanatics, and so that's kind of that sort of buy-in from the top down has really helped the adoption of experimentation and the growth here.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting how some leadership teams really lean into experimentation and others don't. Do you have any thoughts on why that is?
I think, I mean, just from my personal experience, I think that it really depends on the context of the businesses, because and the context of the problems that you're trying to solve too, right? For example, there are some problems that are uniquely suited to the experimentation structure. Whereas there are some problems that have long-standing implications that are just not going to be measured by experimentation. And in many of those situations, you might find that leadership has to sort of take a stance and make a call on like, okay, this is what we're going to do because it's right for the customer, it's right for branding, it's right for the business. At Fanatics, we've kind of evolved our understanding of the long-ranging impacts of things that we do on the site. And we don't have as many of those sort of like decisions to make, but I think my thinking is that it really depends on the problems that we're trying to solve.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, it's one thing when you're kind of refining something that you've already got. It's
Right.
another when you're making a new big bet. I mean, you always want to track everything, but you do it differently when it's like a brand new greenfield thing. But experimentation's had a massive impact on the Fanatics business, isn't that right?
Yeah. So I want to say, like, over the last 10 years, every year, consistently, we are delivering about 8% of the total growth at Fanatics. The experimentation team and the product team sort of working together. We've had, I want to say, quite a landslide of success, at Fanatics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for a multi-billion dollar business, that's a massive impact, 8% growth on that.
Yeah.
So
I think,
congratulations.
thank you.
And so it's no wonder, but I guess your CEO is pretty engaged in your monthly experimentation meetings.
Oh, absolutely. Our CEO, our CPO, everybody, I want to say in C-suite is very engaged with the outcome of experiments. And, I think whenever we have something launching, the first thought is that people have now is like, hey, how are we going to test this? How are we going to measure the impact? And that's exactly where you want to be, just from an experimentation team perspective, where you don't have to deal with like convincing people to test things. It's more of like, how do we do it, right? Rather than why or, and whatnot. So, yeah.
Right. And your CEO is also open to having his mind changed with data.
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, we'll notice it, like, because, we all have our intuitions and, we'll try things and, but, yeah, our CEO is like so data driven, like he literally like consumes Excels, like, he's like, do not shy away from putting data on the slides. Like, I want to see everything. And he will question everything, like nothing gets by him, like he's a very like data geeky kind of person, I think.
Yeah.
But I think it helps us, right? Because we are, we're exactly on the same page with all the conclusions. I think, and the good news for us really is that, it's kind of like this whole notion of focus and context, right? Because like we are very hyper focused on that small little test that we're running. But the leadership team has sort of this broader context of like where the business needs to go, what we need to do. And they will really help us sort of fine tune, okay, like we're testing this piece of the puzzle, but there are these other three things that kind of go into this whole, ecosystem that we have to also account for. And therefore, let's either broaden the scope, let's try testing a couple of other things, so there's always this really interesting dialogue around our experimentation results.
Yeah, that's a really interesting kind of strategic unlock when you've got your top leadership thinking strategically and they can partner with you to help figure out how to frame what to experiment, what to test, and where the biggest opportunities are.
Exactly. Yep.
The other thing you've told me that I think's just so interesting is that if your CEO is demonstrating that he recognizes he can be wrong, and that if the data says something different, that you're going to do something different. It just sets the culture for the whole company.
It's exactly such a culture, setter. Yeah, exactly. Those were the words I would use because, it's like top down. Everybody is, that humility is very much a part of the culture here.
Yeah. Yeah. I just think that's such an interesting topic. We could spend the whole podcast on humility. um, could you tell us a story of a time when you ran an experiment and you had a surprising result?
Yeah. So this one is interesting. You might have seen this on other e-commerce sites too, but we tend to lean into like ads and other sort of like partner initiatives just to for some incremental revenue to bring in some incremental revenue. So we tested turning, but everybody hates ads because they just clutter up the experience. They just look so. They make they make your site look less attractive. And what we did was we tried to turn off ads because we really wanted to understand like what is the impact to the customer in this particular feature. And so we turned off ads on all our grid pages. And the first result, and remember, everybody's rooting for the ads turn off variant to win because we really care about that. But when we turned it off, and it was positive, and we were all so excited. But then we have a very rigorous sort of double click on anything that is looking positive. We try to establish causality between what we're seeing at the very top level metrics to down to the, hey, did we see more people browse more, grid products? Did we see them scroll more? Did we, were more products viewed? And did we see a higher increase in traffic from grid to cart? Like there's all these little micro metrics that we track. Um, and we didn't see a whole lot of that movement, and then there was a lot of question about, well, what is driving this lift in TR, in total revenue? And so what we did was, which is again, another thing that we do here to reduce our false positive risk is we replicate our outcomes. We try to replicate it if we are not able to explain it. And so we ended up turning off this test and rerunning it, and we weren't able to replicate it. It was actually really flat. Going back to like just the historical time, because this is not the first time we had tested it, right? We've tested it about 6 or 8 times now, and we've always seen them be really flat, And that's, I think, what happened here. The test was completely inconclusive in the second run. I think our hypothesis there, or it was surprising to us, from a methodological perspective, that this is a real instance of us running into that 5%, like it was 95% stat sig on the first run, and like it's kind of inconclusive in the second one. So that means it's kind of in that gray area. But also secondly, I think people just, the customer insight we got from that is that people just have banner blindness after a while, like it doesn't degrade the customer experience as much as we think it does. Like qualitatively, it looks terrible, like it doesn't look great, but it doesn't, people just sort of gloss over the banners at some point, the sponsor, then
Yeah.
I suppose, it's hard to know for sure, but I think that's probably what's happening because,
Yeah. Well, I think there's two really interesting takeaways from that story. The first is just, yeah, 95% means that 1 out of 20, you're going to have, a false positive. And so if it really matters, go back and test it again.
yeah,
But then the second thing is, I love how you talked about how you looked at all the other associated metrics and like, okay, if we really did see this result, we should see some of these other metrics moving in the same direction, and we don't. And that to me, because the most important thing from experimentation is learning. And a single metric isn't really going to help you learn. It's understanding, okay, how did the user behavior change? How did the user experience change? And the fact that you're looking at all those things shows that you're really kind of tracking all that and looking to not just get a number and declare a win, but get insight out of every experiment.
Yeah. And it really goes back to sort of, I mean, there's like this inherent assumption whenever you're running an A/B test that whatever you're finding as the outcome, is causal, right? And I think what we really have learned over the years is that yes, I mean it is causal, but we absolutely have to do a double click there because sometimes we might not have the power we'd like to have. We might not have the sample we'd like to have. We might not have the testing environment, like there might be outliers, or like suddenly there's a draft pick and now all our data is kind of doing its own thing,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so you almost owe it to yourself to have that double click on any test outcome.
Yeah. And speaking of learning, you have a wiki at Fanatics, and you kind of have a process for how you kind of test and iterate. Is that true?
Yeah, and I'm very excited to talk about the wiki all the time. Whoever joins Fanatics new as a company, I always like share them with our wiki. And I think the interesting thing there is like we started off with like all these PowerPoints, and there would be these Word documents of test results floating around, and then we realized that experimentation was such a core decision making sort of function at Fanatics that it didn't make sense to have it live in these sort of directory somewhere. So we built a wiki. And, the good thing about the wiki is, we document the results, we provide all this like causal sort of interpretations that we have. And also, we have a very robust sort of next steps and recommendations section that we've also built some automations that like takes that, converts it into a backlog, and we're constantly sort of, iterating and learning from those things, whether it's a win, whether it's a loss, whether it's an inconclusive outcome, like we will take, nuggets of learnings from each test, and then, they become their own. And that sort of feeds into this like, experimentation flywheel, if you will, where like you know, because the feature is already built, remember, like there's no tech dependency at that point. And so, because otherwise our velocity will slow down if we're just waiting for tech to build new features for us, right? So we take the existing features, we build a roadmap on iterations, and then, our roadmap on a regular basis. If there's a new feature that comes in, that takes the highest priority. But then all these other features that have come up from the wiki, just feed our roadmap whenever we're open. Whenever there's any bandwidth, we'll just like slot in these iterations. So that's why I love the wiki, like to
Yeah.
talk about it so much. It's because it's sort of become our growth engine.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're putting a lot of rigor into your process
Yes.
and really documenting your findings and documenting next steps. Does the wiki make it easier for people to say, what other tests have we run like this test?
Yes, exactly. And so what we do is, so we do, by the way, I mean, this is an aside, but the wiki is really helping us as we move towards AI because we now use Glean and Claude, and there's connections with Atlassian on all of those. And so, people are able to build their own little like, feature-based kind of meta-analyses. But one of the things that I challenge my team to do on a regular basis is like, if you run more than 3 tests on a particular feature, then you ought to build like a little meta table of all the outcomes for that feature. Like, hey, we tested this verbiage, 3 different swings at the messaging, or we tested 3 different price points, or we tested 3 different colors. Let's put it in a little consumable, like, that, then becomes like much more, easy to distribute, and people don't have to read each brief. They could just get a quick summary as they look at the meta analysis.
Yeah.
And that is, I feel one of the other kind of value adds that we provide as well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So is the wiki itself your backlog, or do you have like a Jira or something where you're kind of tracking all this? Yeah.
Yeah, we have a very sort of well fleshed out Jira board, with all our information in there. I think we're learning, but we have now with all the AI stuff happening, there's a lot of automation between Jira and Confluence. The other thing that we do really put in the wiki is all the experience callouts, because one of the things that you'll notice as you test is that the result will tell you something that you did not anticipate at all, and you'll be there, okay, why is this metric like even impacted? This wasn't a part of the initial hypothesis, whatever. And then you go back to the screenshots, you go back to the videos that you take when when the experiment is running, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at that. This particular metric, like in one test, we suddenly saw like our expedited shipping rates go up, which is great. I mean, we're not complaining, but it's like, why, this wasn't a part of the whole story, right? But then you go back and you're like, oh, you know what? As we changed this thing on the PDP, this particular vibrancy was elevated, and that's why, it caught people's eye and it's actually, trending well. I mean, so, at least now we're able to kind of tie these pieces together. So like just documenting the actual, visual experience is a big part of the wiki as well.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. So just so many opportunities to learn from every
Yeah.
experiment. Yeah. So I'm sure sometimes you have to deal with people that maybe don't want to wait for the experiment results or they think they know better. How do you deal with situations like that?
Yeah, that one's always tricky. And I think it's, there's this sort of, if you're a high growth company, I mean, there's a lot of pressure on different teams to really deliver value. And especially if experimentation sort of then becomes a bottleneck for, launching features and doing things, there's definitely a deeper conversation, to be had, right? And I think you learn being in experimentation for many years. You kind of learn to get over your own opinions very quickly because you're right only about 10% of the time or whatever. I think when it comes to new teams or new kind of things that are getting onboarded. There's definitely that skepticism that creeps in, and they're like, but I realize, one of the things that I strongly believe is that everybody actually has valid points, when they come to you, because I think part of their hesitation could be that they're worried that the test would not measure what they are trying to measure, because they could just be launching, let's say it's a branding play, and they want to just, invoke customer sentiment and there's no way that your test is really going to capture that, and so what we do is now we've sort of broadened our scope a little bit, and we say that, hey, you know what, we highly suggest you run this experiment. However, we also suggest you do X, Y, and Z, like work with the customer research team to work with this and the other. And to that end, actually, the other thing that we've done is we've kind of launched a couple of different frameworks. So we have a framework that we call the do no harm framework. It's basically these non-inferiority guardrails. So as long as you're not hurting all our primary KPI, you could, and you believe strongly that this is going to have a better impact, after the purchase, or it's going to be better for customer brand perception or things like that, we've now opened up that track for you. And the other thing that we've done is, we're also built a small sample framework, which basically says, you're not going to hit the high standard of orders and metrics that we've placed on, the rigor that we use for our regular experiments. However, this little, like these smaller things that you want to do, let us build something that supports you in your decision making. And that way you could still have whatever rigor is affordable to you and, and still sort of make changes, meaningful impact to the site experience.
Yeah. And probably one of the most dangerous things you can allow is, people to just go make changes thinking, oh, well, this isn't going to hurt.
Exactly.
And if it actually does, you want to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, do no harm tests can be really powerful that way. So as we wrap up, do you have any final advice for somebody early in their career in experimentation? How do they make experimentation strategic at a new company that they joined?
So I think that, when it comes to experimentation, I mean, I'll say a couple of things. One, I think the proof is in the pudding. I think that once, once you start running some experiments, you find teams that are more inclined towards data. You start driving adoption with the people that are already sort of in that frame of mind. And then you start to publicize the insights that you get, and you start talking about it. You do more road shows. You get more awareness and publicity. But then also, not publicity, yeah, like just more kind of, awareness. But I think the other aspect that I've realized over the years is, I tend to not be too persnickety about the data and the experiments. For example, like if your test is getting 300 orders and I need 30,000 orders to, in my test, but I urge you to compare your 300 with your 400 in the B, and it's like,
Right.
okay, there's actually 100 order delta here, guys. So this is telling you something. So I think the more sort of democratic you make it and the more open, the lower barrier for adoption that you can have, at least at the initial outset of launching a program, I think, you're going to get a lot more traction if if you are open-minded. If
Yeah.
your barriers are too high, then people are just not in the mindset to adopt.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those all are great suggestions. And one thing that I was thinking as I was hearing you is that, yeah, find the teams that are the most open-minded and then just try to grow visibility. I would imagine also, you know, showing people surprising results. Like I think a lot of people will be surprised that their win rate's only 10 or 20%.
Right.
And so when you start to do that, people start to realize, oh, my intuition isn't as strong as I thought it was. I really need data here.
Exactly. I think that, one of the most common things I say is like your odds of winning at like roulette or poke are probably higher than your odds at winning at experimentation, and
Yeah,
like it's
that's
literally
pretty
like
funny.
gambling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going to use that one. That's a really good one. Yeah. It definitely changes your mind about how you think about it. If you think about that, like, oh, I've got better luck at blackjack than I do at experimentation.
And if you like a challenge, then you like, and that's all the more fun, right? Like
Yeah,
it's
yeah. But I mean, but to put that into business terms, if you're running 10 experiments and one or two are winners and a bunch are flat and then one or two are losers, if you can avoid the one or two losers, if you can turn one of the flats into a winner,
yes.
I mean, you've probably doubled your overall, revenue growth from that. So,
Absolutely. And I think that, one of the things that's understated in experimentation is just the risk avoidance aspects of experimentation. That is like honestly a big part of my job is like trying to, just cut down on any risks that we are taking, but even if it's not a stat sig, if you think like, oh, it's a do no harm, we could roll it out. But is it really, a do no harm? Like, are we risking the experience in certain ways? I think that is an quantified thing for us right now. But um, yeah, that's kind of the next frontier is trying to quantify the risk that we are actually, helping the business avoid.
yeah, well, I've certainly talked to lots of people where experimentation saved them millions of dollars
Right.
by quickly identifying something that otherwise was going to cost them a lot. And many times those are silent killers because your overall business is growing. You're getting enough wins that you're getting growth, but you don't realize what your growth could be if you were eliminating the losers.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Medha. I really enjoyed having you on the show today, and definitely encourage everybody to follow Medha on LinkedIn. She promises to start posting some more, and we'll be highlighting this episode there as well. So thank you very much.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Ashley. Great chatting today.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation, please support our channel by hitting the like button and subscribing. Better yet, share the episode with a friend. I'm Ashley Stirrup with Growth Book. We'll see you next time on the Experimentation Edge.